Hello everyone, my name is Abhishek and welcome back to my channel. So today we are at day 27 of our complete DevOps journey, and in this class we will talk about Docker bind mounts and volumes. So this is the place where most of the people get disconnected with Docker, right? Whenever they try to understand the bind mounts and volumes, this is where people feel that, oh, Docker is complicated and kind of things go out of their head. But I'll try to make it as simple as possible so that you understand the practical problem and reason why the bind mounts and volumes are implemented. So firstly, what is one of the major problem with a container? Okay, let's say you have a container. Okay, for example, let's understand that we have installed an Nginx application inside this container. Okay, now what this Nginx application does is it continuously you know uh, puts the user information, kind of who is the logged in user, okay, and from which IP address this logged in user has accessed the application. All of this information Nginx tries to store in a log file, right? Now this log file is very important, like, because whether you are doing your security auditing of your company, or whether you are performing any kind of details to understand the user information, the log file has to have all the information, like for example of last 10 days, depending upon your organization requirement, or from last 5 days or last 1 week. Time to time you perform auditing. For instance, this container has gone down. Okay, so what happens in this case is, because the container has gone down, the log file gets deleted. Why? Because containers are ephemeral in nature. What is the meaning of ephemeral? They are very short-lived, right? If you go to our previous classes, I try to explain you that container does not have a file system by default, right? Because containers are very lightweight in nature. What they usually do is they use all of these resources like CPU, memory, okay, and the storage or the file system, all of these things directly from the kernel or the host operating system, right? You remember, that is why a container is very lightweight in nature. That's what I kept on telling you. Now the problem is, if the container goes down, okay, so it used all of these resources from the host operating system, but they are not a permanent resources for this container. That means if the container goes down, they free up the resources from the operating system and they get killed. So now the user details or the log file of the Nginx is deleted. If the log file is deleted, now organization does not have information of the users who authenticated with that specific organization, or the user IP addresses, or the any kind of information that they want to track or perform auditing on the users is completely deleted. This is problem one. There can be another problem, like, let me clear up the screen and explain you. So for example, there can be one more problem where users, where should I this clear up the screen? Just a second. Okay, so there can be a problem, another one, like for example, this is the container, okay, and this is another container. Let's assume that this is a front end container, okay. What is this one? This is a front end container. And let's say there is another container called backend container. Now the backend container keeps on writing a file, for example, and this file has to be read by the front end container to display the content. This is a very common use case, right? So it can, like, the backend can continuously write a JSON file, or backend can continuously write a YAML file. This can be any application, even you can consider as a Flipkart or any other application. Okay, so one of the primary purpose of the backend is to serve the users and write some kind of JSON file or XML file, YAML file, or even in some cases a backend can create HTML file dynamically on its own, and this dynamic content can be served by the front end. So this is a very practical use case. Now, let's assume the same example where the backend container has gone down. Okay, so all the while what backend has done is it kept on writing a HTML file. For example, it wrote half of the HTML file. Okay, or for example, it even like it can serve the HTML files, and it can keep the HTML files in folders where it can say that, okay, this is yesterday's HTML file, this is today's HTML file, or this is 10 days ago HTML file. Now what user can do is, depending upon the user has a section where he can access today's HTML file, yesterday's, day before yesterday's. Okay, so he can access records. But now the problem is, because backend has gone down, and you did not use any persistent file storage. Or what do I mean by persistent? You did not have the permanent backend storage. So the problem with that is, now the entire information is gone. So if the information is gone, now backend, or sorry, the front end can only serve today's HTML page or today's records. Now whenever it tries to read records from yesterday, day before yesterday, or even previous days, the front end will clearly says that, no, I don't have the information because backend just gave me records for today. So this is a very classic problem, and this problem, if user is facing this problem, then that means that your application is going completely wrong. And one more example can be, this is a final example that I'm going to explain you. This example can be like, let's assume there is only one application, okay, and the whole purpose of this application is to read some file. Okay, this file is not on your container. Okay, this is a container. Now what this container does is, it reads a file, okay, that is provided from a cron job on the host. Okay, so, or this cron job can be any place, anywhere else, but the entire thing that I wanted to explain is, there is a cron job. What is a cron job? Cron job is a periodical job which is running on the host or somewhere else, and it creates a file on the host. Now again, this file can be a JSON file, XML file, YAML file, or any file that you want to assume. But end of the day, there is a file on the host file system that container wants to read, and it wants to display to the user. How do you do that? If there is no way a container can access your file system, okay, like I told you, what container can do, it can access a mount, sorry, it can access CPU, it can access RAM, and it can also take resources from the host operating system. But there is no standard way till now that we learned. The container can take a specific directory or a specific folder from the host operating system, right? So these are the three problems that I explained you. Problem number one, problem number two, and problem number three. In problem number one, the problem was, a container did not, like, if you go back, a container did not have a way to actually write details. Or we took the example of Nginx, and we tried to understood that if the Nginx file system cannot keep records of previous logs, or whenever somebody comes for auditing, then they will not have access to the previous logs. That means to say that your organization will have to compromise on the details. This is problem number one. Problem number two is, there is a classic front end and back end, and these two try to share information from each other. But because the back end has gone down, or for some reason, the problem persists, right? And the problem number three is, your app is trying to read some files from the host operating system, but again, it does not know how to read that information. So to solve this classic problem, what Docker has done is, Docker has come up with a concept. It has come up with two concepts. Okay, so it allows users to use one of these options. One is, as a user, you can use a concept called bind mounts. Okay, so what is this called? Bind mounts. I hope the things are clear till now. If there is any question that people have, please provide me the timestamp so that I can explain you in the comment section, what did you fail to understand. Okay, so there are two options. One is bind mounts, and one is volumes. What is bind mounts and what is volumes? So till now the concept is very clear. You understood the problem statement. If you have understood the problem statement, going ahead, it is very easy to understand the solution as well. Okay, so Docker offers you two solutions. One is a very very simple and easy solution. What bind mounts does is, it allows you to bind. The name itself tells you, it allows you to bind a directory inside your container. Let's say this is your container and this is your operating system. I mean, this is your host. Okay, so for example, this is your host and this is your container. Let's say C1. Now, what bind mounts does is it will bind a folder on your container with a folder on the host. So let's say you have a folder called slash app. So here also you have a folder called slash app, or it can be different names as well. So basically using bind mounts, you can bind them. That means to say any file that you are writing inside any let's say this container wants to read some information, so any file that is present on the slash app folder can be always read by the container c1, or let's say this wants to write some information here, so any file that is available on the specific container the container is writing inside itself will be allowed to access using the directory itself. So even if the container goes down, for example, so what happens is the slash app folder is already available on the host. So whenever next time a new container comes up, let's say a container came up with name C2, or you created a new container with C2, what it can do is again you can bind that specific container with the same slash app folder on the host, so that the information is not lost. So whenever the container has come up, it already has the information, or for some reason, let's say that the containers are not even coming up, but you still have the user information or whatever details that you want in the slash app folder, right? You understood what I'm trying to explain, right? Perfect. So this is the concept of bind mounts. That means you are binding a specific directory on the host to a specific directory on the container. And now the next concept is about volumes. Now what does volumes do is volumes also kind of do a same solution, but volumes offer you a better life cycle. Okay, what do I mean by life cycle is basically using volumes, using the Docker CLI. What you can do is using Docker commands, you can create something called as a volume. Okay, so volume is again a logical partition that you are creating on your host. So you create something called as a volume, and you can manage the same things, like you can create a volume, you can destroy a volume. Okay, or you can take this volume out of container c1 and later point of time attach it to c2, or at one single point you can attach a same volume to c1 and c2. So what a volume is doing apart from this bind mounts concept is technically both are doing or both are solving the same problem. Even using a volume, what you are doing is kind of you are attaching a specific folder, or you are attaching a specific file system to the container, but the main advantage is using volume you are not providing the directory details, like you are not saying slash app folder on the host should be assigned to a specific folder on the container. Instead you are saying like create a volume, you are asking Docker to create a volume on the host. Okay, now this volume is basically a logical partition on your host. So if you go to your host and when you perform DH, right? Sorry, DF. What happens is it will provide you all the disks, right? So similarly, when you do volume, Docker will create a logical disk, or it will create a logical volume. Now this volume will be mounted to your container. Okay, so I'll show you practically. Don't worry about it. Like this session is going to be both theory and practical, so that you will be able to understand the difference between bind mounts and volumes as well. But there is very less difference, and the biggest advantage that you are getting using volumes is you are managing the entire thing using the Docker CLI itself. And basically this volumes has a life cycle, right? So why I'm saying that volumes has a life cycle is because whenever you are using volumes, the concept of volumes, you are getting the advantage of managing it, like creating it, destroying it, all of these things. And one more advantage of using volumes is that, let's say this is your container. Okay. If you are trying to bind a directory onto, if you're using a bind mounts and you are trying to bind one specific directory to another directory on the container, on the host, and this is on the container. So you are only restricted to this specific host. Whereas if you are using volumes, you can create a volume on any place, like you can create on the same host, you can create on any external EC2 instance, for example, or you can use any external storage devices like S3 or NFS. Like you are not restricted with the options. So there are bunch of things that you can create with volumes that are using some external sources. So this is a huge advantage, right? Let's say your host does not have enough disk, or for example, your container requires a huge amount of volume. So, and this volume should later point of time be taken as a backup. Okay, so to do all of these things, your host will be with very limited resources. So what volumes offers you is you can also create it on some external storage devices, or on external compute devices, so that later point of time you can easily take their backup. You can again, like, move them from this cloud provider to your local storage, anything, like you can play around with the volumes. And the other advantage, like I told you, is you don't have to like similar to bind mounts, you don't have to play directly with the when the container is running. Instead, you can manage its life cycle using the Docker commands. So by this time we are kind of acquainted with the Docker commands. So you already know that whenever we are creating a container or something, we use Docker CLI. Similarly, whenever we are creating a volume, you can simply say Docker create volume followed by the volume name, or you can also say Docker ls, I mean volume ls, to list the volumes. So what is happening is you are making it easy using the for the users using the Docker CLI itself. And uh, you clearly understood that it is very safe to take backups in this case, because you can also mount it using some external storage devices. And some other advantages are these volumes are very easy to share from one container to the another container. So these are some advantages that you have. And finally, if you can think of one more thing, these volumes can be of very high performance as well. For example, your personal laptop, or your storage on where you sorry, your host on where you are hosting your container, let's say this is of not that high performance. This is a very simple host. Okay, so what you can do is, if your container requires a storage that has high IO, that means let's say your storage has to be read intensive, or your storage has to be write intensive. So in such cases, you can create a very high performance storage, and you can mount it as a volume to your container as well. So these are some of the advantages. Now, I hope things are clear till now, right? So after this, what I'm going to explain is we'll move to practical in a couple of minutes, right? So if you have any questions till now, provide me the timestamp and tell me where exactly you did not understand. Now, there is one common problem, or one common misunderstanding across Docker volumes is, if you go to some documentations, what you would see is somebody would do Docker minus v, and they try to pass bunch of arguments for volumes. And in some places you see Docker hyphen mount. Okay, so people get confused what is the difference between these things. So in both the cases you will do the same thing. Like whenever you are trying to mount a container, mount a volume into the container, you can either use minus v, or you can either use minus mount. Okay, so both are same things. There is only syntax difference. And the reason for this syntax difference is, if you are using minus v, okay, what you are doing is you are attaching a volume, and you will pass everything in a same command. Okay, you'll say you will only differentiate the arguments for this specific mount. Like for example, what is your source means what is your uh, directory on the host. Then what is your destination. Then you can provide some other arguments, like uh, if it is a temporary storage, or do you want to provide some permissions, or whatever you want to provide. So all the options you provide by simply separating using the colon. Whereas if you are using hyphen mount, then this is more verbose option. What do I mean by verbose is, in this case, you elaborate the details. Like instead of saying the what is the directory, here when you are using hyphen mount, what you will do is you will say, okay, this is my source, this is my destination on the container. Then permissions, this is my permissions. So you basically allow users to understand what you are running. So whenever you are passing a command, you provide all the details, so that let's say somebody else is trying to understand this command, so they can simply understand, oh, okay, so you are trying to mount a specific directory, or you are trying to mount a specific volume, and these are the parameters that you are passing to the mount. So if you are trying to use these things in your organization, better than minus v option, go for a hyphen hyphen mount, because this is a very verbose option and it will allow users to understand it very simply. So this is the concept of Docker volumes. Now let us try to understand this practically, so that you will kind of get a feel or understanding of how simple volumes is. It is not at all complicated. I'll show you live using my um, terminal. So let me stop sharing this one here. Stop share. Done. So I stopped the sharing. Now let me stop sharing, start sharing the terminal. Right. I hope you are seeing the right screen. Now let me put my terminal up. Perfect. So like I told you, we'll start with a specific command to see how you can understand the life cycle of containers. Okay. So if you simply see here, I can simply use a command called docker volume ls. So it will provide me the details of what are the running volumes, right? So it says that I have a volume called Argo CD, I have a volume called demo, and I have some local volumes. Okay, so whenever you try to play with the volumes, always go for volumes instead of bind mounts. Like I told you, there are two options, right? One is I can either you can bind a specific directory on your host with the specific directory to your container, that is using bind mounts, or you can also play around with the volumes. So always go for the second option, that is volumes, because of the advantages that I told you. You can manage the entire life cycle using the volumes. You can put it in an external storage system, all of these things. So do not go with the bind directories or bind mounts unless you have a specific use case, or you have a specific reason why you want to go for it. Now, if I want to create a volume, it is as simple as running a command called docker volume create. Let me tell you that I'll create a volume called Abhishek. Now see, what happened is you have created a volume. Now what do I mean by you created a volume? So when you do this, what happens is there is a logical partition, or there is a logical folder or file system that is created on this specific uh, host, which you cannot see. Okay, so I cannot directly understand that, okay, which file system or where did this volume get created logically on my host. But now what will you understand is when you do docker volume ls, you have a specific partition called Abhishek, and you can dedicate this specific partition, or you can dedicate this specific volume to one container or multiple containers, right? So this is how you create a volume. I hope things are clear till now. If you have any question, please provide me a timestamp and ask your question. Don't forget to provide me a timestamp, because many times people ask a question and kind of I do not understand at which point are you asking this question. Now, there is a use case where you want to try to understand this volume. Let's say that you did not create this volume. Okay, somebody created this volume and you simply did docker volumes ls. You understood that, okay, there is a volume called Abhishek, but now let me try to understand what is this volume, where is this volume created. Okay, or is this on a local file system, or this is an external file system, or probably you have given a task to clear up all the volumes, unused volumes. So to understand this detail, there is a command where you can understand the details of volume, that is docker volume inspect Abhishek. So when you do this, you get the details. Sorry, there is a typo here. So you get the details of this specific volume. Okay, so when I did docker volume inspect Abhishek, okay, so this is the command. What you are trying to do is you are inspecting the volume, then it gives you all the details. Okay, so it says that this is created at this specific timestamp. So the driver is local, that means to say that I have created it on a local file system, and this is a logical mount point. Okay, so var lib docker volumes Abhishek hyphen data. Okay, and then you have the name. Finally you have the scope, that is local, and you did not use any options. So this is how you inspect a volume. Okay, so whenever you are trying to perform a cleanup task or whenever you are trying to do any specific action, so this is how you inspect a volume and then you can perform your cleanup action. Now, let's say you want to delete volumes. Okay, you are given a cleanup task and you want to delete this volume. So if I would, let me just change my terminal so that it will be more interactive for you people, whoever is watching this video. So I just use ZSH for better user experience. Okay, so now what I can do is I can use a simple command called docker volume rm Abhishek. Okay, so as soon as I do this, what happens is it says that there is a volume called Abhishek that got deleted. Okay, so let me see if it is correct or not. Docker volume ls. I should see. Okay, so clearly see that there is no volume called Abhishek. There is only demo, there is only Argo CD, and there are some local volumes. Let me also delete this volume called Argo CD. Docker volume rm Argo CD demo. So you can delete multiple volumes using a same command line option as well. So you don't have to use any shell script or you don't have to use anything for deleting multiple volumes if you already know the names, and if you can put it in a single command, or if you can put it in a single line, you can delete multiple volumes using a simple command as well, right? So this is how you start with life cycle of volumes. Now let's start the actual thing. Let's say I want to mount a volume onto my uh, container. So for that, firstly, let me create a container. Let's see if I have any Docker images so that I don't have to write. So I'm using Docker images head -5 to print first five these things. Okay, so I have containers that are running, but looks like all of these containers have an entry point. If it has already an entry point and CMD, it will be difficult for us to understand. So instead, what I'll do is I'll simply write a Docker file here. It will not take much time. So I'll just say from Ubuntu. That's it. Okay. There is nothing inside this container. So I'm just running a Ubuntu simple container for our understanding. Okay. Now Docker build dot. So it should simply create a uh, okay. I understood what is the problem here. So in my case, just give me a moment. Okay, so what I do is I will use the same Docker 0 to hero repository, and you all know that there is a folder inside the repository called first Docker file. So I'll build the same container. Now it will not take much time. I'll simply say Docker build -t followed by a tag called volume demo, for example. And now let us pass this Docker file to it. I can simply say dot, because I'm in the same folder. Okay. So now this image is getting built. We know that there is a image called volume, Docker volume. So what I'll do here is I will try to mount a volume that we will create into this specific container. Okay. So for that, we need to use the Docker volume create command to create a volume. We will do both of them together. Okay. So let's wait for this command to get passed. It shouldn't take more than 30 seconds. Okay, now the image is built. So I have an image on my local. So now what I'll do is Docker volume create. Again, let me create a volume called Abhishek. Okay, so now the mounting part is very simple. Like I told you, I would always go for an option called uh, Docker run -d, where I'm running the container in the detached mode, and I would use an option called hyphen hyphen mount. Okay, so the reason why I will use hyphen hyphen mount is because it will give me a verbose option if at all I want to put this in some shell script, or if at all I want to share this command to other members in the team. It is very easy if I use the hyphen hyphen mount. Even if they're new to Docker, they can simply understand that, oh, okay, what Abhishek is trying to do here is he's trying to use a source. The source is the name of the volume, where he said the name of the volume is Abhishek, comma, target is target on the container, where we will use a folder called slash app, right? And followed by the image details. That's it. So that is all what we will provide. And here the image details would be, I think the image that we created is Docker volume, or you can simply use any other image like Nginx also. Okay, so if you don't want to use the image that we have created in the my first demo, you can also use images like Nginx or HTTPD or something. Okay, so you can simply say Nginx colon latest. So it said the image is not found locally because it's not the image that I created. In this case, you can use this way, or you can also use the previous images that we have built in the uh, previous classes, like the simple calculator image or first demo image or whatever you would like to. Now, what is happening is it is not only running the container, but now it is running the container with a mount. Now this container will have a additional mount. I'll show you how to understand that as well. Let's say you are given a container, you can also understand the details of the container, like if a container has a volume, or if the container it is only using the default space that it has. So to understand that, what you will first do is you use a command called docker ps. What will docker ps do? It will provide you a list of running containers. So in this case, this is one of the running containers, only container, because I don't have any other container that is running. Now you can simply say docker inspect. Here we are not inspecting the volume, but we are actually inspecting the container itself. To do that, what you will do is docker inspect followed by the name of the container. Now once you do this, you will find the entire details of your container. Okay, what is the IP address of your container, right? So if this container has a mount or not, if this container has all the details that you want. And here you will clearly find, if I search for mounts, okay, so it says that this container is with a mount called Abhishek, and this is the source. That means on the file system, this mount is on that specific directory, and on the container, this mount is slash app. Now you did not create this folder, like I explained you the difference between my bind mounts and the volumes. Whenever you are using a volume, you only create a volume, and using the docker create command, and Docker itself will create a logical volume for you. That means it will create a directory on the folder, like it can be on the same host system, or it can be on an external host system. And now this is the destination, and you have some details about the mode, like is it a read write, like are you want to use only a read volume, or do you want to use a write volume? All of these details you can pass through commands. Like I told you, it's not difficult. You can directly provide options here. Let's say if you want to provide additional details, you can simply pass one more comma. And if you want to provide the mode, or if you want to say that this is only read only volume, so you can keep adding using the comma. So this is how you make use of the concepts of volumes. And to stop a volume or to start a volume, what you would essentially do is, firstly you would stop the container. This is very important. Okay, so let's say I want to delete the volume. Now if I directly delete the volume, what happens is docker volume ls. Okay, so it says that there is a volume called Abhishek. Now try to delete this volume directly. Docker volume rm Abhishek. Okay, so what it says, error, because the volume Abhishek is already in use. So this is very important when you are trying to do it in your organization. Firstly, you have to stop the container, you have to delete the container, only then you will be able to delete this volume. Okay, so always if you are given a task to delete the volumes, firstly stop the containers and then you can delete. Now what did we achieve using this class is, we have created volumes and we have mounted the volumes. Now even if the container that we just created goes down, the data of the container in that specific slash app directory is already available on a volume called Abhishek, so that it can be stored, it can be backed up, it can be shared with some other containers, right? So this is a brief I wanted to explain about bind modes and volumes. So the concept is very simple, and if you start playing around with it, you will hardly take, like, 1 hour or 2 hours to understand the concept of volumes and the bind modes. So if you want to understand more details about these volumes, I'll also share the link in the description where you can follow the complete details of uh, Docker mounts as well as Docker bind modes as well as volumes. I hope you understood the video, and I think that it is very clear to you. If you have any questions, please share that with me in the comment section. And finally, please share the video with your friends and your colleagues. Thank you so much for watching the video. I'll see you in the next video. Take care, everyone.